Welcome back to another episode of the CSK8 podcast. My name is Jared Leary. In this week's episode, I am interviewing Lori Mrs. Geeky Green. In this episode, we discuss advice for novice and veteran computer science educators who are interested in integrating CS and technology into a variety of subject areas. We also discuss what an engaging integration experience looks and sounds like, the importance of finding different coding languages or platforms and approaches that work with not only the kids that you work with, but for yourself, rather than just going with others' advice or selling to you. We also discuss how to help administrators and educators understand what computer science is and how it's different from computational thinking, and some suggestions for integrating in online and virtual spaces, as well as many other topics. As always, you can find links in the show notes that expand upon what we're discussing in this particular episode. And you can find that by clicking the link in the app that you're listening to this on, or by visiting jaredoleary.com, where there's nothing for sale. And with that, we will now begin with an introduction by Lori.
So my name is Lori Green, and I've been in education for nearly 30 years. I spent most of that time as a tech integration specialist. I have a bachelor's from The Ohio State University and a master's from Cleveland State University in curriculum and foundations with a focus on technology education.
Can you tell me the story of how you became known as Mrs. Geeky?
It's a funny story. So I was working in Ohio at an education service center, Summit County ESC, and I was leading a workshop on geocaching. And we were going to look for a cache at a nearby cemetery. And one of the teachers fell behind me a little bit. And at the time, my married last name was Hakela, which was very difficult to remember, let alone spell. The teacher was trying to get my attention because she had fallen so far behind. And she was getting frustrated. She raises her hand. She's starting to shout at me, Mrs. Geeky, because she couldn't think of Hakela. And it just kind of stuck after that. And then I started saying, well, of course, I'm Mrs. Geeky. It's chic to be geek. So it stuck.
That's great. So how did you go from the origins of Mrs. Geeky doing geocaching to getting into CS education?
My old life, I worked at Rockwell International the first 5 years after graduation from Ohio State. And it was during that time I was a contracts negotiator for spare parts. And the program manager, who was an engineer, said, if you're going to go and negotiate all these parts, you need to know how they work. And I was working on early stages of GPS, ironically. And so he took me into the shop and showed me how they programmed it and actually had me do some physical things, physical computing. And I thought, this is so cool. Why did I know about this before? That Fortran that I took at Ohio State, everything's making sense now. And a part of me was a little angry too, because I thought, why didn't I get more exposure to this when I was younger? Of course, I'm older, so a lot of things that are available now weren't available then. But I thought in my head then that I wanted to go back to education and make sure that all students, especially in the early formative years, K through 5, get exposure to those types of technologies and the possibilities and the excitement that I felt, when I first started learning a little bit about GPS back at Rockwell. And took a year off, got my education degree at Cleveland State. When I was teaching in Cleveland, my very first job, Cleveland Public Schools, I had an Apple IIe. And we were fortunate to be one of the first ones to get hooked up with a modem. And there was this program called Problem of the Day. And back then, computers didn't have all the video graphics and bells and whistles and programs that they do now. You simply got this text email, if you will. It gave my kids a math problem of the day, and they had the day to solve it and send it back. And they started getting so excited to log onto the computer. What was that problem? Can we solve it? So how do we send it back so the person on the other end understands our solution and find out if we got it right? So more of my kids started wanting to read with a purpose. More of my kids started to increase their interest in math. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, here is another tool to teach, another way to deliver and get them engaged. Did it get all of them involved? No, but it got more involved. So I found another way to get them excited and interested in math and reading. And that was really when that light bulb came on about how integrating technology really is another tool for teaching. Mm-hmm. And you could say the rest really was history. So combined with my experience at Rockwell and this, it really fused together. And that's where it started. And that was, gosh, so long ago. And from there, integrating technology into the curriculum, finding fun ways to make it engaging, but not being the sole focus of the lesson, that it was just a way to enhance or increase the lesson experience.
Your story reminds me of one of my professors, James Paul Gee. He writes about this in several of his books. How he got into video games for learning was watching kids going through video games and realizing just how much reading was involved, and like how that developed like the specialized understanding of language and whatnot, and situational wise. So like if even playing like a card game like Pokemon, kids are learning all these advanced words and whatnot that they wouldn't learn elsewhere, but they need to know it for that moment. So they're like super engaged and like, I'm going to learn what this thing is because I need to know how to play this game better, whether it's like a video game or a physical game.
Exactly. The English component, the language arts component of technology, I think it's overlooked quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I did a very interesting lecture by someone who worked on, I guess, the task force or whatever to bring down the Unabomber. What was interesting about that is they were studying the patterns of his English language, of how he wrote, and they were looking for patterns, and they started highlighting in different colors certain uses of words.
Mm-hmm.
And right there, you're creating, that's a great example of computational thinking. You're taking something, you're deconstructing, you are now creating, what's the algorithm of how he wrote? So
yeah, it sounds like corpus linguistics. A part of my method for my dissertation utilized corpus linguistics techniques to do a discourse analysis to find patterns among like 11 million words of data and try and figure out what do these patterns mean and how do they relate to making music and with technology and whatnot. So yeah, it's a fascinating area of study. And if you want to get nerdy, any listeners who are listening to this, just check out the method portion of my dissertation, chapter 3. So one of the things that I love about talking to other educators is they always have a lot of stories about like moments that just kind of like stick with you, like moments of impact. So I'm wondering, can you tell an experience in education that continues to impact you today?
Absolutely. When I was getting my teaching certificate, I did what they call field work at Roselle. I think it was Roselle Elementary in East Cleveland. And I worked with a teacher named Joy Kump. And she had these second graders doing Punnett squares, which I don't think I did till 6th grade. And they weren't just doing them rotely. They understood them and they could explain it to you and so forth. I was just blown away. And I said, how did you get them to learn this? And she looked at me perplexed, put her hands on her hips and said, well, I never told them they couldn't. And that has stuck with me to this day. Mm-hmm. I never tell them they can't. I don't look at this is for grades 2nd through 3rd or whatever. I look at the situation, I look at my learners and where can I take them?
Yeah, I've definitely found that in multiple subject areas, like whether it's teaching music classes or teaching coding classes and whatnot. There were things that some of the second graders could do in Scratch that were on par with multiple grade levels above them, and same thing with like making music and whatnot. It's funny when kids are really interested in something and are willing to learn things. If you don't tell them that like there's this ceiling, then they can go really far with it usually.
Absolutely. And I've seen that time and time again. I think the more difficult part for teachers is being comfortable with that scenario.
Mm-hmm. So what about something that you believed when you first started in education that you no longer believe?
My answer to that is the definition of technology integration is not what it was when I started. And I've been disappointed by that because I go to schools now and they'll say, oh, we're 1-to-1. We're integrating technology. We have Chromebooks. Well, okay, a Chromebook is a really nice web browser and typewriter, and kids do need to learn how to do word processing. They do need to learn some of the other functions that brings. But I don't equate that with technology integration. My vision of technology integration, maybe using that spreadsheet to solve another problem that you're analyzing over in science class, or using probes and getting the data and downloading it and then looking at the data from that. But that definition, back when I started, tech integration was really just that. It was integrating technology within a lesson. You might do it a lot one day, you might not do it the next week. It's when it was appropriate, when it enhanced the lesson. Now, tech integration is we all have to have 1-to-1 computers.
Are you familiar with the SAMR model?
A little bit, yeah.
The SAMR stands for, and this is related to like technology integration, but it stands for S is substitution, A is augmentation, M is modification, and then R is redefinition. So, like, a substitution for using a Chromebook to type up an essay is okay, you could have written that out by hand. Or an augmentation might be okay, you're going to type out that essay, but you're going to like change the colors and make it like different fonts for different voices in the text. Like, that's going to make it do something a little bit better. And like, you keep going up and up, but the goal is to eventually get to redefinition and make it so that you can actually like do something you couldn't have previously done, like transform it using that technology. I'm totally in agreement with you. Like, I can't stand it when people are just doing that base level substitution. It's just like, okay, you could have done that with any device. You could have done that with a pencil and paper, which is much cheaper.
Yeah.
So speaking of integration, I'm curious about CS integration. So if you were to kind of walk into an ideal classroom that's integrating computer science in some way, what would somebody like see or hear?
Yeah, so when you walk into my classroom, I think it would illustrate what Seymour Papert taught us, that the role of the teacher is to create the conditions for invention rather than provide ready-made knowledge. And if you were to walk into my class and see the integration, you would see maybe some computers out, maybe some robotics out, maybe some household items out, creating something, paper and pencil, but it would not be the only thing you would see. The tech would not be the single driving.
So when it comes to CS integration, are there any classes that you would recommend integrating more than others or less than others?
I would say no. I think it all depends on what you're teaching and what the situation is, and will technology enhance or enrich their learning situation? And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, when I was working in a district, I met with the music teacher and we were looking at ways to integrate technology. What we wound up doing is the students spent mallets out of the Lego robotics, and then we put xylophones in front of them and they programmed them to play the xylophone. We took it a step further and they came up with their own designs, even something that hit a triangle, something that did a drum. And it was the 50th anniversary of The Sound of Music. So the students programmed, I think we had 8 or 9 xylophones in a row. And then we had some kids with some of their other inventions, and they did do, re, mi. But to make it even better, the teacher included that in her winter music program in the evening.
Awesome.
And so we said this was the world's first robotic orchestra. It was so cool. And all the kids did was press play and stand back, and you could hear a pin drop in the audience. And what was really nice was after the concert was over, most of the time folks are ready to go home. People stayed for almost 40 minutes afterwards, came up and talked to the kids like they were rock stars. How did you program that? How did you do that? And they were such great ambassadors. So everything from start to finish. And the point of the story is that was music. But through music, they learned math, they learned about history, they learned to work together. It was fabulous. They created their own designs. To answer your question, I don't think there is one subject where you would use it more necessarily.
Yeah, if I were to go back into the classroom from a music perspective, I'd totally be doing a ton of CS in those classes. And like when I was in the CS class, I was doing a ton of music in the classes and arts and other things. So what about like an integration experience? What comes to mind when you think of an engaging way of integrating?
I think the most engaging ways to integrate, one, if it's going to bring some life to your teaching objective, to what you're doing. An engaging way to integrate too is to take from things that are going on in the real world, incorporate that into how you're integrating the technology. Mm-hmm. So recently we had the first private shuttle go up to the space station. And you could watch it live on TV. You can go onto the NASA website and study what experiments they're doing. You could research online the astronauts and how they got to where they were. What is significant now about NASA partnering with a private company? And you can subscribe to NASA. It's called Spot the Space Station. Put in your zip code and you will get an automated email every time the space station is going overhead. You can see it perfectly with the naked eye. So what's neat is I would have students log the dates that we could see it, the time it appears, the time it sets, where it's rising on the horizon, like northeast, whatever, where it sets. It gives you the coordinates. So there was so much math and science and things that we could relate to. All those things, I'm sure, in some learning objectives there, measurement, distance, study of space and science. So we kept a spreadsheet so we could see if there was a pattern of how many times the space station would go overhead in the evening, if we could predict when it was going to happen again. And if you're listening and you do sign up for Spot the Space Station, when you look for it, you can tell it from everything else because it doesn't blink. Planes blink, but when the space station goes over, it's really surreal. It goes very slowly, crosses the arc. Sometimes it'll be 6 minutes, depending. That's a good question for kids. Why sometimes when I spot it, is it 6 minutes? Why sometimes can we only see it for maybe 3 or 4? And who's on that space station as it's going over right now, and what are they studying?
So I'm curious, like the origins of people's like understanding of education. Like every educational experience or educator that I've worked with has kind of informed me positively or negatively and been like, oh, I want to make sure I do that in the classroom, or I want to make sure I do the exact opposite of that in the classroom. So I'm curious, how have your experiences in education kind of informed that answer that you just gave?
At least for me, I know I learn much better when I'm excited about something and I want to know about it and I can actually see it happening. It's relevant. So I think that's why. And I do go back to my experience at Rockwell, because when I went to high school, there was no way I was pegged to be a Mrs. Geeky. And my friends today are like surprised. But I think because I was able to hands on, thanks to that program manager at Rockwell, I was able to go in and hands on apply and do something that was real world. It just opened up everything for me. And I felt a little gypped that I didn't discover it till then. It was really, really cool. And then even to fast forward, when I was coaching a first Lego League for several years, and I really got into RoboLab, and then I found out you could get into LabVIEW if you had RoboLab. And my ex-husband at the time, who was an engineer, said one day he was watching me stay up to like 2 a.m. to figure out something in the LabVIEW, and he said, I think this has unleashed the secret engineer in you. He was right. I think had I had a lot of those experiences in high school, maybe more of them in college, I probably would have majored in engineering or some related field.
Yeah, it's interesting how those like one-off classes can have the potential to have such a huge impact on you down the road, whether it's a positive experience or a negative experience. Like I really like computer science and programming, but I took programming in high school and was bored with it. I had an awesome class, I probably would have gone into like game design and whatnot.
And I think that too is where physical computing is important. The younger kids, K through 8, they want to see something happen as soon as they program it. So it really gets the excitement going.
Yeah, and that multi-perspectival approach, you've kind of like hinted at it, but like coming at a problem or a question from like multiple angles kind of gets more kids involved with it. Like, oh, well, you're interested in sports, so here's a way that you can incorporate that into this. Oh, you're interested in music, here's a way to incorporate that.
Absolutely. And in fact, that same music teacher, we took a unit that the music teacher that I did the robotics with, the language arts teachers were studying famous explorers. They took that famous explorer, wrote a storyboard of what they're like famous for. Say a Columbus stepping foot on the Bahamas or wherever. I think it was down in the Caribbean where he first landed. And then they had to do a stop action motion movie based on their storyboard. Then in music, they wrote a piece of music to go with it that was representative of that time period. We had a film festival the last day of school. So we incorporated language arts, music, history.
So let's say a teacher's like, okay, this is really cool. I like the idea of not just integrating technology, but also computer science and like other domains and whatnot into the classroom. What kind of advice would you give for educators who are new to integrating different subject areas like CS into their class?
Take baby steps. Don't worry if the teacher down the hall is doing all these, like they're on this website and that website, and they're using Spheros and they're using Makey-Makeys. Put blinders on. Do what you're comfortable with. If it's one lesson you do or one thematic unit, one unit you do this year where you're like, I know that this will really be a way to enhance this lesson, focus on that, do it, get comfortable. The next year, add another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you try and do it all at once, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so don't worry that someone down the hall, maybe they've been doing it for 15 years, maybe they're just like, that's what they do, but do what you're comfortable with. You'll have a great experience and then you'll have more confidence to do more.
Yeah. Whenever like a a prospective or new CS educator would come into my coding classes, they would honestly be overwhelmed because there would be several programming languages going on simultaneously. And like I'd be walking from computer to computer and just like, now I'm helping a kid with Swift. Now I'm helping a kid with JavaScript. Now I'm helping a kid with Ruby, like etc. So it kept changing, and they would freak out, going, "Oh, I have to learn all of these things." It's like, no. Like every semester, I just added like one more thing and just expanded our repertoire. It wasn't like day one, I'm like, "Okay, now class, we're gonna all learn like 5 programming languages at once."
And you raised a very good point, Jared. And I get asked this a lot. What language should I teach the children? What are some of the good physical computing devices we should purchase? But especially when it comes to what language should we teach them one and teach it well.
Mm-hmm.
Those skills are transferable. I learned Fortran back in the day, and that made it extremely easy for me then to learn Python and other languages. There isn't one golden ticket in terms of the program. What you're trying to teach them is logic, if then else, arrays, loops, and so forth. And any of the languages, but choose one that you're comfortable with, that you can teach the students. And I can't say enough to learn it deeply. One of the things I see in a lot of schools that I have visited is, oh, we're doing Scratch here, but we're doing this language over here, and we're doing Hero here, and we're doing Ozobot over here.
Yep.
Great. All the kids might learn 1 or 2 simple things from that, some top level activities, but allow them the opportunity to learn one really well over a long period of time, and you'll be surprised how much that empowers them to do some very sophisticated things.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Even though there were several options for languages, I encourage kids to find one that kind of aligned with the thing that they wanted to create. Like Ruby was used with Sonic Pi, so that was to make music. Whereas JavaScript was used to make like art and animation and whatnot. And then Swift was used to make apps. So like each language kind of had its own focus or theme that you could go with. And I just encourage kids to stick with that one rather than like, okay, every week you're going to learn conditionals in a new language. Like you don't need to do that. How about you actually dive deep into it and learn like how to use nested conditionals for different scenarios and whatnot. And then you can have that transfer.
Exactly. And a lot of tertiary devices compile multiple languages.
So what about advice for like a veteran CS educator or just a veteran educator who's been doing a lot of integration and is interested in diving deeper?
Well, for me, I wind up in my little makerspace out in the garage, just doing more and more projects that maybe I'm not doing in the classroom, but I just keep geeking up on them and challenging myself. And then every now and then I do come across an opportunity where I can share that with students, just depending where they are. But I continue to build and create.
Yeah, I like that. Some of the external projects that I did, like I learned app development. I ended up incorporating that into the classroom for like 4th graders and above. Like they could create apps for their iPad or iPhone or whatever. But some of the stuff, like I learned Java to propose to my wife and used Eclipse, the IDE. And like I never used that in the classroom, neither the language or the software, but I learned a lot from it. And those understandings like carried over into what I did in the classroom.
And you know what I found out too, much to that point, is when you're tinkering and doing more and more on your own, every now and then I'll do something and go, I don't think this would be too hard for the kids. If I broke this down into the sequence, introduced it, and next thing you know, they're doing something that you never thought a 4th grader could do. So it really benefits in 2 ways: for your own self to keep interested in the field, but then like you were saying, it can flow back and matriculate into your teaching.
Do you have any recommendations or cautions for anyone who's thinking about particular grade levels or grade bands? Or would you just say, just try it?
I guess my recommendation is this, is first of all, ask yourself, what are my end goals? What is it that I want to do? Make a list. Maybe I want the kids to learn logic. Maybe I want the kids to see how a spreadsheet can help me analyze numbers. Whatever that end goal is. Maybe I want them to study the space station. Make a list. Look for that something that you can check off and say, yes, it does this, this, and this. Put earplugs in, because Susie's going to tell you this is great working in her classroom, and Johnny's going to tell you that's great working in his classroom, but you need to find what's going to work well for you that you're comfortable with. And there's also a lot of companies that, and I've been in this field, like I said, almost 30 years, and I've been to over 20 ISTE conferences. I can count probably on 2 hands how many companies that I saw that first year are still at ISTE. And the reason I mention this is there are educational movements that come along and vendors pop up who are suddenly the experts on that educational movement, the educational theories that we're subscribing to right now. So look at how long they've been in business, who created the device, how much is based in the educational field, because a lot of these companies are here and gone in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is look at what works for you, and what works for you may not work for somebody at another school. The other thing I would look at, you mentioned grade bands. I don't look at recommended for grades such and such. Back to my earlier reference to what Joy Kump taught me is that I never told them they couldn't. You know your students best. And so disregard the age range. If it's a physical computing device or a program, look at what it does, think about your learners, and if this is a good fit.
Yeah, those are all very valuable things to consider. I've brought it up multiple times on the podcast that there are a lot of CS education companies in particular that are well-intentioned, but just have really good like back-end web developers and really good salespeople, but have like zero educators who have actually worked on the project to actually assist with designing lessons and whatnot. And I just think that's problematic.
At ISTE or even some of the other conferences, when I walk the vendor booths, to your point, when you listen to the salespeople, they can grab all those buzzwords and very well in their pitch. But when you start to peel back the layers and really look at the product, look at its history, look at, can it be scaffolded across many grade bands? Can we start in first grade and build upon it so you can really get deep into that product and use it well? And look at the devices that are out there, the programs, and can you scope and sequence? Can you scaffold and build upon it each year? That's another thing to look for.
So one of the things that I've noticed for some CS programs, it's a top-down thing in terms of the state is mandating, here are the standards that you have to be taught, whether it's CSTAs or some variant of that. And so then administrators are going, okay, now I need to incorporate CS into the classroom. Ideally, I want to integrate it because like we don't have enough time to add yet another subject area to our schedule. But they don't really know what that means. Like, what is CS in particular? Like, I've literally had some people conflate it with just using a Chromebook. They thought that that meant, oh, kids are engaging in computer science. So how do you help teachers or administrators kind of like navigate that to figure out what does this actually look like? So they're not just being sold by the salesman, like these buzzwords, and are going, okay, this must be great because they can talk the talk.
So yes, computer science is a big priority for a lot of districts, for a lot of states. So let's ask ourselves, why is it a priority? Because it doesn't just teach computer science. It doesn't just teach programming. It teaches logic. It teaches ways to organize, to look at a problem and how to problem solve. And I think I can articulate that the best by giving you an experience I had several years ago. So I mentioned earlier, I had coached First Lego League for several years. And this was at a private girls' school. And I think it was about the 5th year or so, some of the girls who had moved on, who had been on the first team, they were now in high school. And they came to a practice. They actually approached me and said, we'd like to volunteer and help. So they came to a practice one day to help the younger girls. And as they were leaving, I said to them, what made you decide to want to come volunteer? You're in high school. You've got tons of homework, sports, you're so busy. Oh, well, we just really had a good experience. And I said, oh, great. I'm like, do you want to like go into engineering or programming now? And almost simultaneously, the two girls said, oh, no. I said, well, what did you take away from it? And one girl said, I look at anything I get now, English or whatever, and I need to accomplish a task. And I take some of those skills that I used from being on that robotics team and I apply it. It helped me to organize and helped me to think about things. And I can't remember verbatim everything she said, but that just made my whole year, if not more, because that's what you want. When we think of computer science, we're not trying to make all of our young people become programmers. When we look at computer science, we look at a skill. They should have at least, a baseline of skill, but we also know that experience will transfer to everything they do. And I think that's kind of the invisible benefits that we don't about, but that scenario, that young girl articulated how she benefited from being in robotics and programming. Selfishly, my youngest daughter, I was just having a conversation with her the other day, and she actually wanted to see if you would call her and get an audio clip from her. She told me almost the exact same thing. She said, no, I may not want to go into programming. Now she's getting a master's in GIS, but she said it gave her so many skills that she uses across all academic subjects.
So if I were to be cornered by an administrator in an elevator and they were to ask me to kind of distill that down right before they're about to leave the elevator, would it be like as advice, hey, rather than focusing on the individual standards, focus on applications of the broader concepts and practices outside of just CS itself? Is that an accurate kind of distillation of it?
Yes, good summary. Absolutely.
Thanks.
And in fact, take the word computer science out because it's so scary. People, oh my gosh, I can't teach programming.
Right.
And you get this vision of somebody sitting behind a computer typing away, and it's anything but that. And so maybe we even need to rephrase or give it a new term. But yeah, forget the word computer science and let's look at the bigger picture of what this will afford our students.
Yeah, it's such a broad term. It covers so many things from software and hardware side.
It's a scary term because of the vision we get.
Yeah, especially because a lot of people in education, like administrators and teachers, just don't have experience with computer science, like learning it and whatnot. So it's like this nebulous, I don't know what this would look like and whatnot. So speaking of like nebulous terms, so there's also this conflation between like computer science and computational thinking. So how would you help administrators and other educators understand what the difference is between integrating CS versus integrating CT?
So computational thinking we've been doing since the beginning of education. And I know when I read, I think it was Jeanette Wing's article, I almost insulted by it because I said, wait, we've been teaching kids how to recognize patterns for years. We've been teaching how to deconstruct and how to look at the important things of a problem to focus on for solving and applying it in the next experience we have. Computational thinking is something that occurs naturally when we're learning. I think what maybe the focus now has to be is finding new ways to show students how to use some of those skills as they get older. And by teaching computer science or teaching coding, you're automatically going to hit those computational thinking concepts. So I feel it occurs naturally. I think we're just giving those steps names now, and maybe we just need to be more mindful of them as kids get older, that this is the process we go through each time.
Yeah, working on standards for a state, I had to engage in a conversation with a state board member who confused the two and didn't realize that computer science was an entire field of study while computational thinking was just a way of thinking.
Yes.
And so this person was asking, well, why do we need all these standards if it's just a way of thinking? I was like, no, this is different than computational thinking.
I know not everyone will agree with what I just said, but that's my perspective on it. I think it occurs naturally, and we've been teaching it. I think this movement maybe helps us to get a little more of awareness of the steps, especially as things get more difficult as kids get older with the curriculum.
Yeah, it's a useful framework, but it is certainly just putting a label on something that has been done for a long time.
Yes.
So what about teaching online or in virtual spaces? So with the vagueness of a lot of districts not even having a plan for what is going to happen because of COVID, like over the next year or longer, do you have advice for educators who are trying to figure out how to integrate technology or computer science or coding or whatever in an online or virtual space?
Let's start at a general level first. There was this assumption that it would be so easy to teach online, I think. A good friend of mine who's in Chicago called me one day crying. She goes, it's not even that the kids don't know, it's the parents that don't know, and they're freaking out and they can't help their kids. And the point is that kids know a lot of social technology. I don't think they know a lot of tech problem solving. Here's the thing. When you're teaching brick and mortar versus teaching online, there are different methods for keeping kids engaged, pacing, requirement of assignments, and so forth. There are a lot of legal things you have to think about in terms of the American Disabilities Act. There's a lot to think about visually when you present things on a screen. And I think there was this false sense of, oh, it'll just be so easy. And I guess we've all found it's not. And the other bigger issue is, and I don't know the perfect answer, but the digital divide. I think schools were shocked. How many do not have internet access? And it's not as easy as just parking a bus and giving free Wi-Fi, if that's something your district can do, to that neighborhood. There are so many other issues that go into that. What if I had 4 kids at home? They all needed to be on the internet to do their stuff. And if I'm lucky, they each have their own computer. But what if they don't? They have to fight for time on the computer. We have 4 computers on the network. There are a lot of things we have to think about. Quality Matters is an excellent nonprofit that provides training on those topics. They have a variety of different classes about how to keep kids engaged if you're teaching online. The short story is you have to look at the differences between teaching brick and mortar and online, methods of delivery, expectations, types of assignments, awareness of digital divide, awareness of the legal requirements through the American Disabilities Act.
Yeah, there's a ton to consider, and I don't think people realize how difficult it is as a systemic issue in terms of the lack of devices at home, the lack of understanding of how to use the devices at home, and then even from the teacher side of things, like, how do I do this thing online? Like, I know a lot of music educators right now are freaking out trying to figure out, how do I do what was supposed to be a large ensemble with like 120 kids in an online setting? Like, what do I do instead of that? Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer, just a lot of questions.
Right. And there's a learning curve with that too. So I would recommend to districts, and I know summer's already started, but to check out Quality Matters, see some of the courses that they offer. I think they're very helpful. They're nonprofit. I'm sure there's other organizations too.
So you've kind of already mentioned that you're constantly learning, like with the Quality Matters thing. Like, I know you just renewed or completed certification with that, but how do you continue to like iterate and develop your abilities as an educator over the last couple of decades?
2 things I do in terms of the iteration is I will find something new or something I want to make and go out to my little maker workshop and kind of lose myself as an escape. And I enjoy that trial and error and finally getting it to work. I'm sure my neighbors have heard me say, I got it. I've been working all afternoon in the garage. And sometimes, to be very honest, Jared, I walk away for a few weeks and I just have to reset. I'm always listening to podcasts and online, the 1 hour little webinars. I go to ISTE. I go to other conferences. I like to hear what new schools are doing. And I'm fortunate I get to go and observe different schools. And that always refreshes me. If I go and observe at a different school and I see something they're doing that I didn't even think about, because it gives you a fresh perspective and fresh ideas. Like, oh, that's so cool. That always recharges me.
So what about your tenure in education? A lot of people think it's like over 50% of teachers are gone in the first 5 years. How do you prevent that kind of burnout if you don't have those opportunities to go see other classrooms, or maybe you don't have the money to go to those kind of experiences?
To prevent the burnout, I would develop my own little cohort of teachers, not formally, but find that group that you can lean on a little bit.
Yeah.
As I tell kids when I'm teaching, you have a shoulder buddy. Have that group of friends that you can ask questions to, colleagues, go and have coffee with every other week, or even if it's once a month, and exchange ideas and vent with the challenges, especially those first few years of teaching are very difficult. And I can see why the burnout happens. But I think if you have a little cohort of friends that you make a point to get together with and learn from and try different things and get supportive for each other, that will help. The other thing I would do, Jared, is I would recommend to those new teachers is to join, if it's only one organization. You start getting their magazines or their research journals and so forth, and get immersed. If it's the Engineering Society, if it's the ISTE, if your state has an organization you can join. Most states have a tech. Ohio has OETC. Join it and get involved with it.
Yeah, and CSTA, it's starting to get chapters in most states, so you'll have some local as well as the national one as well.
I think that would be helpful.
What about recommendations for like improving equity and inclusion in CS?
My first recommendation on equity and inclusion is going to be controversial, but don't ever assign homework that requires the internet at home for a variety of reasons. I think it's extremely unfair because everybody has a different level of access if they have access to the internet, and right away there's inequity. And so that would be my number one recommendation. Number two, do not have robotics or coding or any of those tech classes an after school club unless you're already integrating it during the day. So every child has the same experience. Stop making robotics and coding for the gifted classes.
Yeah.
I don't understand where we thought gifted equals programming or gifted equals physical computing or robotics. And I can give you 100 examples, I won't today, but of where I would have students I'd be working with. I'm just not sure yet, how they learn. I'm not sure what their interest is. They're quiet or I haven't quite figured them out yet. And boom, we get into, like with RoboLab years ago, there were icons that you drag together and it didn't require a lot of reading. Well, boom, all of a sudden I had a couple kids that I just was scratching my head about. And they were writing more sophisticated programs than some of my ones that we're doing much better in class. And next thing you know, they were the leaders. You will discover so much about your students when you integrate and into the curriculum. And it's not fair to only keep it after school or for the gifted and talented because you really missed a lot of kids then. So those 3 things I would recommend.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. While I'm a fan of like providing the extracurricular opportunities and whatnot, it creates an equity issue because I knew a lot of people in high school who really wanted to do all these extracurricular things, but could not because they had to work a job to support their family. And these were like 16-year-olds.
Yeah, you don't know what the situation is after school. Maybe they can't get rides home afterwards. Not to say that, listen, if you have a robotics team that competes, you may have to meet after school, but don't start doing that at your school until you have made sure that you are giving all the students during the day the same exposure.
What kind of research do you wish there was more of that could inform what you have done in the classrooms or what you do now working with teachers?
I definitely want to see efficacy in the K through 5, and I'd like to see attitude surveys completed by the students that show, especially for girls, their attitudes towards technology and how that changes over those 5 years. Because as we know, once they hit middle school, things change for a variety of reasons, and girls may not necessarily be drawn to that field. But I found in K through 5, those biases or those opinions they had of coding or robotics or physical computing don't exist, and they really grow and gain confidence. But we need more statistical data to back up my anecdotal. But any concern about differences in science and math, time and time again, we see that they score fairly equally, boys and girls, K through 5, and then it kind of changes in middle school, but not for the reasons we think. I think more of a, I'm good at that or I'm not. But if we get kids down at K through 5, both boys and girls, more confident in those areas. And I just like to see attitude surveys.
Yeah, the self-efficacy surveys and like attitudinal surveys, they're usually like these one-off looking at 1 year, maybe 2 years, but it's not this longitudinal, let's track from kindergarten all the way through 5th, 6th, 12th grade or whatever. Like, I would love to see stuff like that where it's the same kids, same group, and let's see how they change over time rather than just these one-off things. Do you have any questions for myself or to the field at large?
How did you get interested in the combination of music and technology?
Like I mentioned, in high school, I took a programming course, and the reason why I did it is because I was just looking at jobs and was like, okay, well, I like technology, and this one pays well. Let's see what this does. They're starting it this year, and I was bored with it. But the thing that kept me going, literally kept me alive, was making music, and so I wanted to help others with that. So I followed music education and did that for many years, and it wasn't until I think it was like my last year or last semester of coursework when I took a music class that's just called Electronic Studio, and all we did was create music software using a graphical programming language called Max MSP. And going through that class, I was like, well, when was this a music experience? When was this a coding experience? And when was it the two inseparable? And I didn't really have an answer to that. And it was a fascinating like set of questions. So when I went back into the classroom after finishing all my coursework, I was applying for jobs and got offered a bunch of music ones and just saw this one technology position and was like, all right, I'm just going to go in and promote like, hey, let's do arts-based coding, and rather than doing like Microsoft Office and things like that. And they just so happened to be starting a coding program, and they loved what I was saying. And they're like, yeah, let's see what you can do, even though all 3 of your degrees are music education. And so went in and just started with Scratch and then built from there and just kept adding more languages and diving deeper into CS and have just kind of loved it. Music was great because kids were really interested in it and wanted to engage with it outside of school. Like, I love that about that subject area. But with coding, you can engage in music, but you can also engage in video games. You can engage in like anime. You can engage in like all these other subject areas. Just inherently, it's interdisciplinary. And so I loved that and have just kind of been running with it for several years now.
That's great. You remind me of something I often think of or share with audiences is that I know when someone's integrating technology or a teacher, when I ask them, when do you teach programming or coding? And they say, oh, I don't have time to do it. And then I turn around and walk in their classroom and they're using Scratch to do something, or they're using Logo to program something or another language, and don't realize, yeah, you're teaching coding, but you've integrated it so well that you don't realize that's what you're doing.
Yeah, we recently did a stakeholder meeting with the district, and that was one of the things that we realized in our survey. We need to distinguish between teaching coding or integrating coding, or teaching computational thinking or integrating computational thinking, and like how teachers kind of conceive of those as all different. The joys of designing research, especially surveys and whatnot. Are there any questions that I have not asked that you want to discuss?
And one of these days, I'm going to write a book called Everything I Needed to Know About Teaching I Learned From. And there's like 6 or 8 people. Each one will be a chapter. One will be with Joy Kump, because she taught me a lot of other things too. And the other was my mom. She one time said, because I was getting frustrated early in my teaching career, and she said, you know, Lori, every child has their own blueprint of learning. And you're the builder that's helping to construct that blueprint. And that has stayed with me my whole life as well.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, especially just the idea of you have to get at the individual when working in a group setting. That's something that I've constantly emphasized with pre-service and in-service educators, is you can't just teach at a group of kids. You have to find a way to work with them one-on-one.
Yeah, and it's not easy.
No.
I don't know if I could be back in the classroom now. I mean, there's just so many more demands even than when I was a classroom teacher. I think it's a very difficult time.
Yeah, especially now with there's just so much going on. Where might people go to connect with you and the organizations that you work with?
Well, I work for Boot Up PD, and you can email me at Laurie, Laurie, at bootuppd.org. And I also have a website, Mrs. Geeky, MRSGEEKY. There's a form there where you can email me as well. And I have some resources there too, which I probably need to update either at mrsgeeky.com or .org and at Boot Up.
And that concludes this week's episode of the CSK8 podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Lori. She's been a wonderful coworker to work with. Friendly reminder, you can find links to many of the topics we discussed in the show notes by clicking the link in the description or visiting jaredoleary.com. And the only thing that I ask from you as a favor is to simply share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from listening to the suggestions for integrating CS and technology in the classroom. Stay tuned next week for another Unpacking Scholarship episode, and 2 weeks for another interview. I hope you're all staying safe and are doing well, and I hope you have a wonderful week.